Hello and welcome to the Husch Blackwell Labor Law Insider Podcast. I'm Tom Godar, your host, and I'm glad that you've come along. In this podcast, we welcome guests with practical expertise and experience regarding labor law issues, and they share their insights related to this ever-changing area. The breadth of developments in laws related to unions and individual workers' rights that we are experiencing under the Biden-appointed National Labor Relations Board and led by General Counsel Jennifer Abruzzo is unprecedented. These developments demand that employers and those giving counsel to organizations stay tuned into these changes and make necessary adjustments to their practices and to policies. When President Biden was elected, he promised to have the most union-friendly administration ever, and he is fulfilling that pledge. So buckle up and hang on for this wild and wonderful ride in the world of labor law. Good afternoon, sports fans. Well, this is the Labor Law Insider, but I've always wanted to say that. Nobody's invited me to be a broadcaster except for curling, and I don't want to even get into that story. But we're going to talk about college athletics and the most interesting development we've seen in a little while about the trustees of Dartmouth College and the Service Employees International Union. Read, we now have a union made up of a basketball team at the college level. And that's pretty recent stuff. And it's a lot of fun since this is also the week. I don't know exactly when we'll get this edited out, but we're looking at the brackets right now. This is Monday, the start of March Madness week. And so talking about a basketball team, which, by the way, is not in the tournament. In fact, they have one of the longest terms of not being invited to the tournament of any D1 basketball program. That's Dartmouth. But to talk about the nexus between labor law and college athletics is pretty interesting, and we have the right guys to do that. You've heard from on the Husch Blackwell Labor Law Insider a couple of these guys, and we have 1,000 lawyers spread around the country, but I don't know of any two that are better situated to help us sort of walk through this process than Tyler Paetkau and Jason Montgomery. Jason Montgomery himself was an All-American athlete, but not at a D1 football program, but an NAIA program. But he knows a lot about the rigors of being a student athlete and the control that that the athletic department, coaches, and so forth put on you, which is one of the big deals in the Dartmouth decision affecting basketball, not football. And Tyler Paetkau is one of my sort of go-to guys. I want Tyler to do my brackets for the tournament because he loves college athletics. He's a Michigan fan, which is, I try to forgive him for that when I can, but not always. So well done on football. I'm not so much for your basketball this year, but, things happen, man. Next year, maybe.
I can't say I was an All-American like Jason, but I did watch a lot and also engage in a lot of the social activities on campus.
Well, Jason practices primarily out of our KC office, but he's also got a lot of chops in NCAA issues, and he was an NCAA regulator, if you will, and watched how the NCAA was engaged with its colleges and with its athletes. And Tyler practices in Oakland, but again, nationally. He was just doing some work for one of our big universities here in the Midwest. I don't generally name the names of our clients on this, but so this is really a fun group to talk about this today. And so let me kick it off. I think we should probably say, what is going on in terms of this Dartmouth College decision? So just give us a 30,000-foot level, what happened in the last couple of months. Tyler, why don't you kick it off?
So for those of you who followed the news, it's been in the news a lot the last couple of weeks. The Dartmouth University was subject to a petition by its men's basketball team filed by the SEIU. It is local 560 in Hanover. And the 15-person men's basketball team contended that they were, in fact, statutory employees under the act. And they won, at least at this level. The regional director there, Laura Sachs, issued an opinion directing an election. And based on some of the recent board memoranda, advice memoranda, and other decisions, the Northwestern case, the USC case that we talked about, I think, on our last podcast, this was hardly surprising, at least to us at this point. And I would say also that if they can organize Dartmouth, then they can organize a lot of other universities and colleges across America. And this is just, I hate to say, but just the tip of the iceberg at this point.
Jason, in your prior life and in your life today with Husch advising colleges and universities, it's my impression that the American college system of athletics is largely unique worldwide. I'm told that there's almost $1 trillion of income generated college athletics around the country on an annual basis, that the NCAA itself has something like $500 million in assets, and that its income, just as the NCAA, is somewhere in the neighborhood of $1.3 billion as of 2023. That's a lot of dough. It affects something like, I saw this number, 520,000 participants in NCAA championship sports around the country. Is there anything else like this in the world that you're aware of?
There really isn't. There are some here and there. There are a few countries that have intercollegiate type athletics programs, but very rarely. And so, this is, the country that, many, international athletes come to for training because of the system and the amount of money that's put into the system for training purposes. In fact, the one thing I will say about the $1 billion, and this gets into why perhaps we are where we are, is that, a significant portion of the trillions and the billion that the NCAA has is specific to the men's basketball tournament that we're talking about today. It's all about the television rights to have that. And that $1 billion essentially funds the entirety of the NCAA and then is distributed to the member schools to fund their programs. And so where I think there are concerns, it's about economic fairness to those athletes that are participating in the men's basketball tournament and whether they are compensated appropriately with scholarships or otherwise. In Dartmouth, interestingly, one of the few Division I schools that don't offer scholarships in the Ivy. And, overall, this NLRB decision that we're going to talk about further is really one of many decisions that have been occurring in the last 5 years by courts, some by state legislatures, and others that are attacking this concept of economic unfairness.
Well, and last time we talked about it, lots of the talk was within the area of athletes being able to themselves receive some compensation. Sometimes it's huge compensation for their name, for their image, for their likeness, that isn't just accruing to the benefit of the university. And I love the way you framed it, Jason, in terms of this larger economic juggernaut and this general sense of where does fairness come out. It seems odd to me, I'll be honest with you, that it's the NLRB that's playing the game, but not within the way that Tyler framed it up earlier, with a really aggressive board and its general counsel that said, we want to be much more relevant to the sort of workplace broadly defined than just the unionized workplace. And so this plays right into it. This notion, by the way, that it's the NLRB driving it actually drives out a whole lot of the colleges that are going to be in the tournament over the next 2 weeks plus, 3 weeks plus. And it really relates only to a subsection of it by its own design. Tyler, why don't you help straighten us out on where that sort of jurisdictional line lays?
Sure. So Dartmouth is a private, nonprofit university. Of course, there's many in that category that are regulated potentially by the NLRB. And it's to be contrasted with the vast majority of state schools that potentially could, as we talked about before this podcast, potentially could be dragged in if they name the NCAA or the conference a private entity as a respondent. But technically, this is against private employer. So the big five conferences, many of which are state schools, are not directly affected. However, we know about the USC case where the NLRB named as a respondent not only USC, a private school, but also the NCAA and the Pac-12 conference. So we could see state universities and colleges also being named in these petitions. So that's really the limit, but it's not really a limit.
So, and we know that there are an awful lot of private schools, but perhaps not as many playing at that highest level of D1 competitive athletics, but does that necessarily mean that they wouldn't be subject to potentially this organizing? And it really takes us to, that step of why is it that the board, and they used a rationale, and while I agree or disagree with it, their rationale had to do with some of the traditional indicia of employment. Why is it that they found that these 15 basketball players, all of whom will have graduated or left the program within 3 or 4 years? It's just kind of funny to me this way. But why they found these athletes also employees and not athletes solely? What kind of indicia did they use to take a look at that? Jason, given the control that you became aware of when you were a college athlete, talk about at least that one piece of it that is the control aspect that an employer might have over employees, or in this case, a program over its athletes.
Yeah, it's really interesting because, the kind of the nature of athletics requires some scheduling. The nature of extracurricular activities requires some level of scheduling. And the NLRB said that was, equivalent to control, because you controlled the movements and the time frame within which athletes were going to participate, whether that's at home or on the road. But really most interesting, and probably interesting to some of our listeners as they're reviewing their own policies and procedures, was essentially likening a student athlete handbook, which many institutions have, that has what your requirements are to be an athlete that the NCAA has set for, those being academic and so forth, likening that to an employee handbook and saying many of the things in here we would see an employee handbook where there are certain requirements of employees and times within which they can participate, and opportunities for penalties if they are ineligible or if they do something that is inconsistent with university policy. They could be taken off the court, for example, and all of that seems are these ideas of control. Now, when I was an athlete, I was just happy to be on the field, and I think to the extent I think that we would practice 7 days a week at one point. The NAI had no rules related to 20 hours is what the NCAA has, and so it's really interesting looking at and kind of comparing individual experiences, because you could see that if this logic is applied in the way it's written without this idea of economic fairness, because men's basketball makes a lot of money, then it does apply to NAIA schools. It applies to Division III schools, and I'm not certain that institutions are ready for that.
Yeah, the athletes have to sign all sorts of documents and promise that they're going to practice or not practice, that they can practice with coaches and without coaches, where their training table is, what they're going to eat or not eat, when they're going to be available to come to all of the events. As you said, scheduling is primary. And don't take these classes, because if you take those classes, you're not going to be able to make the practice or to the film room and all that sort of thing. So when I've talked to parents, and I've not had these kinds of kids, but when I've talked to parents with D1 athletes, my gosh, they tell me how crushing some of these things are. It really is full-time plus, isn't it?
Yeah, you can see that, Tom, in the decision. There's a couple of lines I'll just read that illustrate the control that the board is relying on in these cases. Quote, when players travel to away games, the coaching staff requires players to travel, eat, and sleep as a group. The players also attend meetings, review film, interact with alumni, conduct media interviews, and sign autographs as directed. The coaching staff shapes the itinerary for departure time, travel time, hotel check-in, meals, and lights out. And then they provide an example of a practice, I think an exhibition game against Princeton. Actually, it was a real game against Princeton in January 2023, where it's down to the minute what these student athletes are supposed to do, including spending time with alumni, signing autographs, and presumably getting those donations. So, I think this started really with the NIL decision by the Supreme Court, subjecting the NCAA to potential antitrust liability and freeing up the money for the athletes. To Jason's point about the fairness, not so much, I'm surprised they picked Dartmouth men's basketball, but at some schools, football and basketball generate enormous amounts of money for the university. And you can see an argument there where they're really, leading to the professional athlete. It's more regimented, and they're actually producing substantial revenue for the school.
Yeah, I read before and preparing for this that the income for Ohio State University, again, not in this discussion exactly because they are a public sector university, number one, so I am also going to the outlier on the high end, $250 million, $251 million. And I don't know if that states every nickel or if that just states the direct lines that you can read from the athletic department as opposed to some of the other sort of alumni engagement. So it's a startling number, and there's a startling control. But let's talk about much smaller numbers that, at least in this Dartmouth case, talk about compensation, because under the traditional test for employment, you had control and compensation. So what's the compensation piece, which I found, frankly, startlingly small in the traditional sense, but they seem to include other things that are kind of wishy-washy in terms of compensation. So what's the compensation piece they found was sufficient for Dartmouth? Either of you can jump in.
Yeah, so I thought it was interesting. I was reading that as well as someone who doesn't practice in this area and in the labor area. They found that thousand shoes that were used to participate. I think they said $1,000 worth of shoes for per athlete. That and equipment and apparel that are provided, which I think some would argue that's just necessary to engage in the activity. It's not any sort of compensation.
How much do the band members get paid for their uniforms? I think they're provided for free. Maybe the band should organize too. I don't know.
Yeah, and then they came to the conclusion that compensation of a non-traditional form, in this case, the analysis of that is appropriate because NCAA rules prohibit traditional compensation. Now, what they didn't say is they don't prohibit giving scholarships, but Dartmouth does. So theoretically, one of the solutions you could think of is if Dartmouth provided scholarships, if they negotiated, how does that impact the concept of the Ivy League in general?
Yeah, because the Dartmouth and the Ivy League does not present athletic scholarships, and theoretically, the students who are playing basketball are just eligible to receive the scholarships that are made eligible to any student. Is that at least what the case suggests?
Exactly, and they say and they're not eligible to receive any other compensation under NCAA rules. So we have to look at these non-traditional, which is assuming in some respects that it would be appropriate for them to receive some level of compensation, whether scholarship or otherwise, based upon their athletics participation, which gets to the heart of the college athlete model that and Tyler mentioned. I think has first been significantly blows been drawn to in the antitrust world with the Alston the NCAA versus Alston decision.
What are some of those other indicia of compensation, Tyler? And do we see those in any other sort of board case?
No, as Jason mentioned, non-traditional, and the board, at least the director in this case, Laura Sachs, emphasized that even a small amount of compensation is enough to start out with. And I was surprised that they considered the benefits of an early read on admission at Dartmouth a significant non-traditional compensation. In other words, since the admission rate is so low, 6%, I think the last year, that if you know in advance as a student athlete, you're going to get financial aid to go to Dartmouth and you're in based on the admissions standards, that's a significant benefit according to this ALJ. They also, as Jason mentioned, the apparel, the tickets for games, basketball shoes, lodging, meals, and other benefits of its peak performance program. A lot of the training and support that they give student athletes to perform are then considered, according to the ALJ, to be employment benefits.
It's funny because Dartmouth's basketball program didn't generate a profit. So they said, who cares? We're not here to tell you how to run your business. But the board director, the regional director, did look at things like, well, there's probably an unknown intangible benefit to the university by having a basketball program. And that probably then generates some additional delivery of gifts to the university or to the university's athletic department. So on one side, traditional business issues like, generating a profit, not important, but these sort of intangible benefits that the university receives by having athletic programs was weighed heavily as a sort of benefit to the university. That's why they exercise the control and give early admission and so forth, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, part of that is meeting with alumni, getting the word out. There was evidence that they were encouraged to post on social media promoting Dartmouth, wearing Dartmouth apparel, all of that to benefit the school. They also mentioned, just in the context, since we're in the March Madness season, if one Ivy League school qualifies, all Ivy League schools get paid, out of those TV rights and other benefits from being admitted. So it's been Princeton historically, but all of them benefit. So at least the reasoning in this decision was by promoting the college publicly, by soliciting donations, or not directly soliciting, but being there to shake hands, grip and grin, as I say.
Hey, Tyler, thanks a lot. I really like the idea that student athletes are expected to grip and grin, that's part of the control that the university might place over them. But gentlemen, with your approval, I'm going to push the pause button right now. We're going to start this up again in a week or so with you fellows. And I'd really like to find out a little bit more about how we're going to differentiate between Dartmouth and other schools, other school activities, and then get a little bit of your insight on predictions as well as practical steps that universities can be taking now, even as this issue is in the state of flux. So, Tyler, Jason, thank you so much for joining us on the Labor Law Insider podcast, and we'll be back at it in just a short time.